The night was cold, and the streets of New Haven were nearly empty. A few hover cars hummed in the distance, their lights flickering through the misty air. I had just finished locking up my small shop when I noticed movement near the supply crates outside. At first, I thought it was a stray animal, but then I saw a small, thin figure darting forward. Quick hands grabbed a loaf of bread from the crate. The moment I took a step, the figure froze. "Hey!" I called out. The thief spun around, clutching the bread to his chest. Under the glow of the street lamp, I finally saw him clearly, a child. His skin had a silvery sheen, almost metallic under the light, and his wide, golden eyes were filled with panic. His clothes were little more than rags, and his frame was so thin it made my stomach twist. An alien. The city had plenty of them now. Velmari refugees who had arrived after their homeworld was devastated by war. Some had been taken in by human sponsors. Others were left to fend for themselves. The boy didn't run, but his breathing was quick, his small body tense. He looked like he expected me to lash out, like he'd been caught stealing before and suffered for it. I didn't move any closer. "Are you hungry?" He stayed silent, his grip on the bread tightening. "It's okay," I said gently. "You can have it." For a moment, he didn't believe me. He just stared, unsure whether this was some kind of trick. Then, without a word, he turned and bolted down the street. Something in my gut told me to follow. I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the way his ribs pressed against his skin. Maybe it was the way he hadn't taken more food when he could have. Or maybe I just knew. He wasn't stealing for himself. I followed him through the dark alleyways, keeping my steps light. The lower district of New Haven was quieter at night, the glow of distant city lights barely reaching these streets. The boy was fast, slipping between broken fences and crumbling walls. He moved with the desperation of someone who had done this before, someone used to running. But he wasn't careful. His feet left faint tracks in the dust, and when he squeezed through a gap in a rusted fence, I saw the loose metal shake from his passing. I stayed back, watching as he ducked into an abandoned warehouse. The roof sagged in places, and shattered windows let the cold night air slip through. Slowly, I approached the entrance and peered inside. The boy was kneeling beside a still figure on the ground, a woman. Her silver skin looked too pale, almost gray. She lay curled on a thin blanket, her breathing shallow. Even in the dim light, I could see the sheen of sweat on her forehead. His mother. The boy, still clutching the stolen bread, broke it in half and gently pressed a piece to her lip. She barely managed to lift her hand to take it. A sharp ache settled in my chest. She was sick. And she wasn't just hungry, she was starving. I stepped inside. "She needs help." The boy gasped, spinning toward me. He scrambled to shield his mother with his small frame, his golden eyes flashing with fear. "Go away." I held up my hands. "I'm not here to hurt you." He didn't believe me. His breathing turned ragged, his body trembling as he tried to make himself look bigger. I pointed to my jacket pocket and slowly reached inside. He flinched but didn't run as I pulled out a flask of water. "She's dehydrated," I said. "Give this to her." His eyes darted between me and the flask. After a long hesitation, he snatched it from my hands and crouched beside his mother. Carefully, he lifted her head and pressed the opening to her lip. At first, she was too weak to drink. But after a few drops touched her tongue, she took slow, desperate sips. She coughed, her body shaking. Then, her golden eyes flickered open. For a moment, she didn't seem to understand what was happening. She tried to speak, but only a weak rasp came out. Her gaze moved past the boy and landed on me. "Who are you?" "Just a shopkeeper," I said. "And someone who doesn't want to see you die tonight." I couldn't leave them there. The warehouse was freezing, with nothing but broken walls and thin blankets shielding them from the cold. The woman, Soraya, as I would soon learn, was too weak to stand on her own. And the boy, Zevran, though fierce in his protectiveness, was just a child. They wouldn't survive like this. So I made a decision. I have a place nearby, I said. It's warm. Safe. You can rest there. Soraya barely reacted, her golden eyes dull with exhaustion. But Zevran tensed, gripping her hand tightly. No. I crouched to his level. She needs food. Medicine. You can't help her if you both freeze to death out here. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at me like a cornered animal. I'm not taking you away, I added. Just offering shelter. Soraya exhaled weakly. Zevran, her voice was barely above a whisper. Please. That single word broke his resistance. His shoulders slumped, and after a long moment, he gave a tiny nod. I helped Soraya up, careful with her frail body. She weighed next to nothing, and every shaky breath she took made me more certain I'd made the right choice. The walk back to my apartment above the shop was slow. Zevran stayed close to his mother, his golden eyes flicking between me and her with every step. He still didn't trust me. I didn't blame him. When we finally reached my place, I led them inside, closing the door against the night's chill. The warmth from the old heater filled the room, and for the first time, Zevran relaxed, just a little. I set Soraya down on the couch and covered her with a thick blanket. She sank into it, her breath unsteady but steadying. Zevran hovered nearby, watching everything I did with wary eyes. I moved to the kitchen. You both need food. Something easy to eat. Minutes later, I returned with 2 bowls of steaming soup. Simple, but warm. He sniffed the air, then hesitantly took the bowl I handed him. Soraya tried to lift her own bowl but struggled. Before I could help, Zevran was already at her side, carefully feeding her small spoonfuls. She took them slowly, each sip bringing a little color back to her face. I sat across from them. "What's your name?" I asked the boy. He hesitated, then murmured, "Zevran." I nodded, then glanced at Soraya. "And yours?" Her lips parted, voice hoarse. "Soraya. Soraya. A beautiful name. You don't have to talk," I said gently. "Just focus on getting better." She gave the smallest nod, her body sagging against the couch. Zevran finished his soup quickly, then curled up beside her, his small hand gripping hers. Even now, after everything, he was still guarding her. "She's all I have," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I looked at them, 2 lost souls, clinging to each other in a world that had given them nothing. Not anymore, I thought. "You're safe here," I told him. "Both of you." For the first time, his golden eyes held something other than fear. Hope. The days passed, and slowly, Soraya began to recover. At first, she barely spoke, exhaustion still weighing her down. But she ate, drank, and rested. Color returned to her silvery skin, and the hollow look in her golden eyes faded bit by bit. Zevran remained watchful, never straying too far from her side. But he softened, too. The tension in his small shoulders eased, and when I caught him sneaking bites of the fresh bread I left out, he no longer looked so guilty. One evening, after making a simple dinner, I sat across from Soraya at the table. She had finally gathered enough strength to sit upright, her golden eyes meeting mine with something I hadn't seen before, curiosity. "Why are you helping us?" she asked. I shrugged. "Because you needed it." She studied me for a long moment. "You didn't have to." "No," I admitted. "But I wanted to." She lowered her gaze, fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "Humans aren't like this where I'm from." I smiled. "Then maybe you've been around the wrong ones." A small, almost shy smile touched her lips. It suited her. That night, after Zevran had fallen asleep on the couch, Soraya sat beside the window, staring out at the city lights. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her. She turned, her voice soft. "I don't know what comes next." I crossed the room and sat beside her. "You don't have to. Not right now." Her golden eyes searched mine. "You've already done so much. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't have to." She hesitated, then reached for my hand, her fingers light against my skin. "You saved my son," she whispered. You saved me. Something in her touch sent warmth through me, something unspoken passing between us. A connection. A promise. Stay, I said before I could think better of it. Both of you. Her breath hitched. Are you sure? I laced my fingers through hers. I've never been more sure of anything. For the first time since I found her in that freezing warehouse, Soraya truly smiled. And in that moment I knew, this wasn't just kindness. It was the start of something more.